We are at the 12th Armored Division annual reunion here in Abilene, Texas, at the museum. It is September 18th, 2004, and we are here with Sara Wates. She has several stories to tell about her husband, so we'll go ahead and get started with that. First off, tell me your name or tell me when you were born and where you were raised. A little bit about yourself.
I'm Sara Wates. I was born April the 15th, 1925 in Edgefield County, South Carolina.
Okay. And tell me how you met your husband.
Well, I never
Actually,
did.
let's start. Tell me his name and how
My husband's name was Vernon Howard Waits Sr. And I never did meet him. He was always there. You know, by that I mean I always knew him. We grew up together, went to the same church together, you know, went to social functions. I just always knew him.
Was he the same age as you?
No, he was 4 years older.
And so he was born and raised in the same area you were?
Yes, same county, same state.
Okay. What was his family like?
Well, like mine, but that don't tell you much. There were 5 children in his family. He was the oldest son. He had a sister older and 3 younger brothers. They farmed. My daddy farmed. And my mother and father and his mother and father double dated together during the boogie days. And then their son and my mama and daddy's daughter, we ended up getting married.
So it was a close-knit family right from the get-go.
Very close-knit.
That's great. When did your husband, or how did he get into the Army?
He was drafted.
Okay. And when was that?
December the 20th, 1942.
And when were you two married?
We were married February 27th, 1942.
So what do you remember about Pearl Harbor?
Pearl Harbor. We were not married at the time. That was just before we got married, which promoted us getting married, because at that time no one in high school married and went back to school. They married and quit school. Well, during the Christmas holidays, I realized some other classmates that were sweethearts were getting married because of Pearl Harbor and failed the draft. So we had planned to be married in June after I would graduate from high school. So we just went ahead and got married, you know, and went back to school. Because when I went back to school after the holidays, these other friends of mine had married during the holidays and come back to school. So we thought, well, why wait, you know? So we didn't wait. We got married. And I went ahead and graduated from high school. During the year 1942, I married, graduated from high school, gave birth to my first child, and saw my husband leave for the Army. So you're talking about a little 17-year-old growing up fast? I did.
Oh, my goodness.
But I don't regret it. You know, I don't regret a bit of it.
Where was he first stationed?
It was Camp Campbell, Kentucky then.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He was inducted into service at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And he wasn't there long before they sent him to Camp Campbell, Kentucky.
Did you move with him?
Yes, I did. I stayed just a few months in Clarksville, Tennessee, which was just across the Tennessee and Kentucky line. And he went on maneuvers, I guess you would call it. Mm-hmm. And I went home. My little son and I went home. Then, after those maneuvers, he came to Camp Barkley, Texas, and we joined him here until he left for port of embarkation.
What do you remember about Camp Barkley?
Here?
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so you said Camp Barkley. I don't remember much about the camp. We did go there for some social events, but I didn't go on post much. I lived here in Abilene and made a lot of friends, and I wanted to stay when he had to leave. But my mom and daddy thought I should come home. His mom and daddy thought I should come home. And he thought I should go home. But I loved it here, you know. I wanted to stay.
That's great. So after Camp Barkley, he was sent to New York? To Camp Shanks?
He did. No, he didn't go to Camp Shanks. He was sent to, he may have been sent to Camp Shanks, which I don't know. I just know he left Abilene for the port of embarkation and left from New York. But whether they actually took him to a camp before he left to sail or not, I don't know.
Do you recall if he mentioned the ship?
The name of the ship?
Uh-huh. So tell me what his experiences were.
What's that ship name?
Was it Empress of Australia?
Queen Mary.
Okay.
Is that ship by that name?
Yep.
Okay. That was the ship. That was the ship.
So just tell me his
Queen Mary may have been the ship that came home on. I don't remember. Because we had a reunion in Washington, I think it was, and they had it on that ship. It had been pulled in and sort of renovated. That's just vague memory. That might not be right, but it's sort of right.
So go ahead and tell us about his experience in war.
In the war. Mm-hmm. He did not talk a lot about it. He more or less talked about the fun times he and his buddies had, you know, things that they would do. Now, he did mention, I guess you'd call it the Holocaust, where you would see these bodies out by the railroads. But about all he said about that was, as we would look at his battalion book and there was pictures in it, he said, I was there. But he never went into details of the horror of it or anything like that. He only said he couldn't eat for a few days. But he didn't go into detail. He more or less talked about one person and another person that was on the tank with him. And he would talk about, like, the little German children, how they would give them candy and things like that. But he didn't talk much about the horrors of war. Not much.
I assume that he went to Herlisheim?
Yes.
He was part of one of those battles?
Yes, he did. He talked about that. He named several battles. Maybe the Battle of the Bulge. If I had the map, I could tell you. I got a map at home that, you know, showed where all they went.
Who were his buddies?
Tilford Julesen, Joe Boland, Owen Shoemaker, Walter Hansen, John Molesky was his first sergeant. Leon Mock was his commanding officer. Melroy Ferran. Melroy. Oh, I can name more because I met so many of them at these reunions. But I met them when they were at Camp Barkley and they would have social events. So I met some of his buddies then. And this association has caused us to feel like another family. It's hard to tell someone how the friendship makes you feel. You know? And every year when I come and I think, well, I'm getting older and this might be the last one, but then I leave thinking, well, I want to come back. And when the next year rolls around, I want to come back. And I think he would be proud of me because at one reunion we wives were talking about whether or not we would come back if our husbands died before we did. And after we left, you know, the conversation and went to our room, he told me, honey, I would like to live hoping that you would continue going. And for that reason, I just feel like I have to go. Mm-hmm.
Was he ever injured?
No.
Really?
No. Now, he did receive the Silver Star. And if I remember what happened. They were in their foxhole. See, he was in the artillery. And the infantry is ahead of the artillery. And the artillery has to telephone to the infantry No, the infantry telephones to the artillery how close the enemy is, and then they set their guns to shoot up and over the infantry. Well, the enemy was approaching, and they were in their foxholes. The telephone lines got knocked out, and they could not give a message to the infantry, and they could hear the enemy approaching. And he got out of the foxhole. He thought, well, I'll die if I stay here. I might die if I get out. He got out and repaired those lines, he and another guy, but I can't think of his name. They got out and fixed those telephone lines and got a message through. And he's not supposed to be someone that knows how to work on telephones. But then since his death, in reminiscing over some old books, he was in the CCC camp. Do you remember that? No, you don't remember them. Have you heard tell them? Conservation corps, some kind of conservation corps. Anyway, it provided income for young men that didn't have jobs. And I was reading in that book, and it told us some schools they had for the boys, and it mentioned Vernon Waits in this school on telephones. So I guess he must have picked up a little information there that helped him get out and repair that line so they could get a message through. But he wasn't wounded, but he did get the silk stuff.
That's great.
And he came home all right, you know, no shell shock. He was just as normal as ever, you know, as far as adjusting, there was no problem.
Did he have to serve in occupation duty?
No. No, he didn't. Because pretty soon, the war ended in May. You came home on points, like if you had a wife, if you had a child, or maybe age, I don't remember. But the 1st Armored Division was scheduled to come back to the States. The 12th Armored was staying. They might have been occupation then. But he was transferred from the 12th to the 1st because he had points to come home. So he came home with the 1st Armored Division. But he didn't. He got home in November of 45. Yep.
So did he come to New York City?
You mean before he sailed or after?
Yeah, when he came home.
Yes, he came home, but he was discharged from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, I think. Yeah.
So did you meet him in New York?
No. I received a telegram. Oh, that was a happy day. Made it safe from no man's land back home to you. But I didn't know when he was coming home. So I was at church one Sunday afternoon, and my sister came in, you know, in the service and tapped me on the shoulder. She said, "Vernon's home." I got up. I came out of church. He was at my mama's house, and I went home to live with them after he went overseas. He had been discharged, and he caught a bus to Edgefield, and a friend brought him to our house. You know, so I really didn't know he was back in the States until he drove up at my mother's home.
So did he have any memorable experiences that you recall?
You mean during combat?
Mm-hmm.
No, as I said, he didn't talk much about the fighting. No, he didn't.
You mentioned earlier that he told you a lot of stories about the pranks and his buddies and stuff. Can you give us a couple examples of that?
No. This wasn't a pleasant story, but one of the men, I think he was on his tank, Kittner was his last name, Kittner. He was killed, but accidentally by one of their own men. He was shooting at a duck, and it shot this guy in the neck. And he told me about that, but well, he told me enough to know that it was rough over there, but he also told me enough to know that as they stuck together, the men, and supported each other morally, and in a lot of ways, it wasn't all bad, you know.
So does he stay in contact with his buddies once he was in the States?
Yes. It took some few years, 3, 4, maybe from 4 to 6 or 7 years. I don't think it was 7 years. before he knew about the association. You see, he was transferred from the 12th Armored Division to the 1st Armored Division. So the 12th Armored Division formed this association, I think, when the war ended and before they came home. And the first one held in the States was in New York. Well, since his name had been transferred from the 12th Armored to the 1st Armored, the news didn't catch up with him for a few years. In fact, we got some information on the 1st Armored Division having an association and reunion, but he didn't know those people, so we never did respond. But then once he joined the 12th Armored Association and began being reunited with his buddies, we kept close touch. At the time of his death, I received sympathy cards or flowers from 35 of them. And when they would get together at reunions, it was just entertaining to sit back and hear those men talk. That's when they laughed and talked, but I don't remember the stories of things they did.
When did he pass on?
July 2nd, 1990.
So how many children did you guys have?
3.
Can you tell me about them?
I have a little boy, was born not long before he was drafted.
And his name?
Beg your pardon?
His name?
Vernon Howard Wates, Jr. And then 10 years later, our oldest daughter was born, Sara Virginia. We call her Jenny. Then 3.5 years later, our other daughter, Beth, was born. Agnes Elizabeth, we call her Beth. And Jenny is with me here. Now she came with me. Our oldest son was not yet Vernon Howard Wates, Jr. And then he has a son, Vernon Howard Wates, the 4th. And since he didn't have a name, my husband was called Vernon. Our oldest son, Howard Vernon Waits the 4th, got called Bo. He's called Bo. And I have a great-grandson, Dalton. And then a granddaughter. My son has a daughter, Sarah Lee. So I have a good family. They support me, you know.
So what did he do after he came back from the States?
Well, he first went to work in the cotton mill, which he was in a cotton mill, but in a different town. So when he came back, during the war then, the young men had been drafted off the jobs, and they were begging for women to come to work in the plants because they were in dire need of help. So I went to work in a cotton mill. Never had been in one in my life. So I went to work, and then when he got home, he wanted a job in the plant that I was in, where they would have given him his job back at the plant he left had he asked for it, which was about 35 miles north of us. But he applied where I was working, and he told them that if they didn't give him a job, he was going to take the best spinner they had. My job was called spinning. And they gave him a job, and he worked there 3 years. And he got acquainted with this other fellow about his age that ran a machine shop. You know what a machine shop is, though? Okay. He went to work with him. See, at that time, they didn't have vocational schools like you have now. But the government would come and approve this place of business, you know, as to whether or not you could receive a career from it. So this guy's shop was approved as a machine shop, and my husband went to work for him. And then the government paid him so much a month, which I think was $90, but I've forgotten. But then the guy he worked for paid him, you know, for being on the job too. So he worked there several years, and then this man that owned 17 trucks, and I think maybe they might have been all oil trucks, and he wanted a mechanic to come and keep up his trucks. And Vernon had done work for this person at the shop where he was working. So this guy asked him to come to work for him and keep up his fleet of trucks. So Vernon did, and it almost broke the heart of the guy he was working with. I thought he was never going to tell him he was going to quit. But see, the government pay had stopped, and this guy didn't want to give him a raise, but he was staying on to get just to make what he could there. Every day I said, Vernon, did you tell J.W. to go leave? He said, no. So I thought, well, when are you going to tell him? So finally he told me, so I told J.W. today that I was going to work with Lon Courtney. He said he was fixing to weld something. He had already put on his helmet, J.W. had. And when he told him he was going to leave, he said J.W. just took his helmet off and laid it down and left for the rest of the day and didn't say a word. You know, he just didn't want Vernon to go. But anyway, Vernon had to go, you know, for financial reasons. So he kept up this fleet of trucks, I believe, until 1959, I think, is when he bought it. Lon Courtney, that owned the trucks, gradually kept going out, getting rid of one more truck and one more truck and one more truck on the road, until he finally offered to sell the business to Vernon as a machine shop. So Vernon bought it and ran this machine shop for a few years. It might have been 1959 when International Harvester came in. Anyway, after owning the shop as a machine shop and in business for himself, International Harvester Company, you know who I'm talking about? I wanted a dealer. And they approached Vernon, had been recommended to them by somebody. So he took on the International Harvester dealership. And then Case bought out International Harvester and became Case IH. And I have a son who started to work with his daddy when he was working for Lon Courtney. They had a fleet of trucks. My son went to work there sweeping the floor and picking up tools. So he stayed on with his daddy with the dealership International Harvester. And Vernon still owned that at the time of his death. And then my son bought me out, and he kept it for 4 years. And then he sold it out because farming was going out in our part of the country. Peach trees were being pushed up every year. And the way the peaches go, that's the same way farm equipment dealers go. So Howard kept it 4 years and sold out. And really, with tears in his eyes, he said, "Mother, I tried." I said, "How would I know you did?" I said, "I heard your daddy say in 1989, before he died in 1990, that he didn't see how much longer that business could stay there." And Jenny, my oldest daughter, heard me say that one day, and she said, well, she felt like her daddy held on to the business, so Howard and Bo could decide what to do with it. He had gone on Social Security, and we had a little farm out in the country, and he spent part of the time with the business, leaving the rest for my son and grandson to run, and he would piddle around at the farm. So that's about the story of our life.
That sounds like a great life.
It was.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I can't think of anything.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your stories.
That's about it.
We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for asking me. You know, I was surprised when Mr. Ferguson asked me.